Hello everyone, Hadifemi Great here again, and this is me after a while into our first experiment. So by now you will have figured out that the first experiment have closed, and we added a total of just one submission. The submission itself was actually invalid because as the requirement you are made to provide the repository of your project. However, the submission did not provide that. But that's by the way. So one of the things I noticed with the whole thing was that the reception was good. People was kind of curious to know what was going on about it. However, the contributions were quite low. So I'll take it as probably maybe we don't need a portfolio project. Probably maybe we all have portfolio projects. So we probably thought, well, maybe there is no need to do that. I would assume that. So that's what I'm assuming. But yeah, that's by the way. So we've started, it's an experiment. We are trying to see how far we can go with it. So I'll take it as, yeah, even though we had a good reception, the contributions were low. And as a result of that, the first experiment was a failure. Yeah, that's my verdict on that. But we won't stop on that note. Instead, we are going to even get better at it. So in today's episode, we'll be looking at something quite straightforward. So what I'll be sharing with us today is how to deploy a Django project to AWS Lambda using Zappa. And I thought this is going to be more like those episodes where are going to be prerequisite for further projects we are going to be building. Because I believe for whatever project or whatever test we are carrying out, AWS Lambda will be sufficient enough for us. So if you're able to get yourself into AWS, you create an account, log in, and you set up a profile. Any project you are going to be deploying to Lambda most likely would not incur any cost unless it gets so big that you are making money from it, and obviously AWS would take consideration at that point. So I thought this particular episode would be good enough for future project rebuilding, that we would be opportune to be able to deploy our projects whenever we need to. Front-end deployments are relatively easy. We have Vercel if you are using a server-based front-end development like Nest.js. And we have Netlify if you are just building a single-page application that does not require any server content. So we have those already. So I think the issue we might have would sprung up from being unable to deploy our backend services. So in today's episode, we are going to take a look into that. We are going to quickly spun up a project using juice.io. Then set up Zappa, set up GitHub Actions. So also we'll be looking at GitHub Actions to kind of make our deployment automated. So it makes things even easier. So the subject of this whole video is going to be about trying to prepare us for even future projects. So even though the first project wasn't successful, it does not have to stop there. So that's just on that note. So yeah, this is where I'll be removing myself from the camera. And from here on out, we'll proceed to the screen to showcase how things can be done. Bye for now. Alright guys, welcome back. So I have on the screen a step-by-step process of what we'll be carrying out. So the first we are starting with is creating a Django project. And we are going to be using juice.io for this so as to fast track our process. So let's quickly get into that. So I have my juice.io profile logged in already, and as you can see, I have existing projects. However, for the sake of this test, I'm going to create a fresh one. So I can come here and just create a blog project. So we'll be using the blog template to achieve this. So that means we're going to have a blog API out of the box. So I'm going to select blog and create project. So this is going to run through its stuff and create our project. So let's wait for it. Alright, so the project creation is done and we are currently within the project dashboard itself. And because we use the blog template, we have a blog app out of the box, which makes sense. So now going back to our steps, the next thing we want to do is to set up Elephant SQL. So this should be SQL. So the reason why we want to set up an Elephant SQL DB for our project is because we are deploying within a serverless environment, which is known for not having a good file management system underneath. So we don't want to rely on the file management within the serverless environment. Instead, we want to have everything stored within our own special database. So remember, by default, creating a project within juice.io or any Django project by itself, you have an SQLite DB, which is going to be running on your computer's memory also. But in this case, we are within a serverless environment. We are not sure how the memory or the file structure even works. So we want to ignore that entirely. So that's the whole plan. So based on that, you are going to need an Elephant SQL account, which is quite straightforward to create. You just create one and you log in, and you'll be presented with this page. So let's zoom in to see what it entails. So what you want to do now is to create a new instance, and you give it a name. So this, I'm going to give it blog project just to match what we've created earlier. And this is the only plan you can create because we want to create a test plan, which is supposed to be free. So we have that. I don't need any tag, so we are good on that note. So I'll select my region. Because it's using AWS underneath, we have the US East 1, which I'll select as well. And yeah, I can create the instance. So as you can see, the instance is created, and I can click on it to see the details, which is what we want to work with. So here's the details. I can copy this and come back to my Juice project to set it up. So I'll copy this. Come back here, come back to settings, come back to database. I want a PostgreSQL. So the hosts was what we copied, so I'll put that here. And here is both the user and the database name, so I can copy this as well. So DB name and DB user. Then the ports, let's confirm that. So there is no specification of the ports, and by default, the expected port for most database is meant to be, what we call it, 5432. So I would assume that is the situation here as well, and have 5432 here. Then finally, the password. So let's copy that as well. And as you can see, Juice.io understands that this is a password, and you can just put that in. So if you want to view it, you can, but this is what we have. So at this point, we are not very sure if this is a correct configuration. So unless we start our test server, we can also take a while. So to avoid all that, we can use a simple tool to confirm if the configuration is okay in Table Plus. So here I'm going to search for Table Plus. And here is Table Plus. So I'm going to try to add a Postgres server. And I'll just specify the same information we specified for this. So yeah, I would ignore the name for now. Let's have the server here, and let's have the port as default. Then the database name and the username are the same. Then finally the password. Okay, so let's test to see the connection is okay. Yep, so everything came out to be green, which means this connection is okay. And that's all we want to do on that. So I'll update my database now. And with that done, it's going to require me to run migrations again to migrate things to that database. So I'll run migration. And migration was successful. So we are done with the second step, which is setting up database and linking. Yeah, that's just so random. So the next thing we want to do is our file storage as well, because by default, the file is going to be stored within your computer or your system memory directly. However, again, we are within a serverless environment. We want to avoid that. So for this, we are going to use Cloudinary to set this up. So let me pull up my Cloudinary account. All right, so here is my Cloudinary dashboard, and this is what we need. So we need the cloud name, the API key, and the API secrets. So let's come back here, come under file storage. So by default, it's AWS. We want to change that to Cloudinary. So we need the API name, copy this. We need the key. And finally, the secrets. So we would update this as well. All right, so those are the setups we need to do. And once we are done with that, we can run our test server to see if they are working. And once we confirm that, we will move on to the next stage, which is downloading the project. So let's do that. So the project is done downloading. All right, so I've downloaded the project, extracted it, and opened it up within VS Code, and this is what it looks like. So by default, we have the start server sh, we have some Docker configurations, which we won't need because we are deploying this through AWS Lambda. So I can quickly have a cleanup by removing this, then removing the Docker configuration. Also, I'm removing the db.sqlite. All right. So we have all this. I can add .gitignore just to ignore our environment file. And yeah, I'm going to specify .env. So that's not going to matter yet because we've not really initialized a repository here. So that's not going to matter. So the next thing we want to do, let's take a look at our stages. So now we have the project. The next thing we want to do is to install Zappa. And here is what Zappa looks like within the pip repository. And all we have to do is install Zappa. So I'll copy this, come back to my projects. And also we need to create an environment for this because we are working with a Python project. So obviously we need to create an environment to manage that. So we can come here. I'm using virtual env. I believe we should also have a means to create an environment already. I won't really bother too much on that. So yeah, I'm going to have make virtual env. And I'll just call this t underscore env. All right, so that's done and it's activated by default. So now we can install Zappa and also install other requirements. So let's start by installing other requirements first. So here we can have pip install -r requirements.txt. All right, so all requirements seems to be installed and successful. Now we can install Zappa. So pip install Zappa. All right, so Zappa installation is completed as well, and I want to just update my requirements with the latest information. So I can have pip freeze, then this requirements.txt. So that means Zappa would also be included within the requirements. And before we move to any other thing, let's at least test our project to see if it's working. And we can do that by having Python manage.py run server. So it's complaining that I have 19 unapplied migrations. So let's do that first. So we can have Python manage.py migrate. So the migration is going to be a little bit slow because we are communicating to an external database, which I believe the server itself is not even that fast. So that's just a quick note. All right, our migration is complete. Now we can clear once again and run our server. So this time around, the server ran successfully without any complaints. So let's actually test this. And as you can see, we have access to the server. So let's check out the blog path. All right, so there we have it as well. We have the blog path looking good. All right, so let's move on to the next stage. We've installed Zappa. The next stage is to actually configure Zappa and create an S3 bucket. So before we actually configure Zappa, let's create an S3 bucket to this effect, and we would see how to use that. For this reason, we would need our AWS account. By the way, we would need this anyways because we are going to be deploying to the AWS Lambda, so we inevitably need an AWS account. So I would admonish us to create one. It might require you to provide your credit card, But bear in mind that this is going to be needed for when you start running services that requires you to pay money. So that's how AWS works. By default, you probably won't need to pay anything. It just needs your card for that situation. So yeah, that's just a quick note about that. And what we are going to be exploring next is the S3 bucket. Let's check it out. So I have a couple of buckets here already. However, I'm going to create one for our Zappa deployment now. So the same environment as our database. So this, I'm going to call it Zappa-blog-projects. So that is used to match a URL link or URL format. That's why we have this. Yeah, I think I can leave every other thing as it is. So let's create the buckets. So here's our bucket here, and we're going to need this name later on. So that's just about that. This is a prerequisite to the stage of configuring Zappa. So the next thing we want to do is actually configure Zappa for our projects. So here we can stop our server for now. So for this, we need to create a new file called zappa_settings.json. So let's do that. Zappa_settings.json. So within here, we are going to have an object, and we are going to specify the environment we are working on. Because in Lambda, every deployment happens within an environment. It can either be dev, it can be stage, it can be production. So I'll specify production just in our case. You can specify any environment you want. So I'll put production here, or prod, anyone you want. But let's make it production so that it makes more sense. And for our production settings, what are we defining? So we need to specify the AWS region, which is going to be US East 1. That's what most people go with. That's what we're going to go with. Then we're going to specify the path to our Django settings. So it's not Django settings module. I'm just using tab to quickly type that out. So it's just Django settings. And this is going to be blog_projects.settings. So that's where it's located. So this is going to be blog_projects.settings. So the next one is going to be the project name itself. And the project name is quite straightforward. That's blog_projects. Then next, we want to specify a runtime. So for this, we are going to be using the Python 3.9. That's what I currently have on my system. I can have Python --version. So 3.9, that was what we tested the project with, and it ran. So let's use that as well. Then finally, we would specify the S3 bucket. So remember the bucket name we defined the other time, which is Zappa-blog-projects. So yeah, that's the basic configuration we need for our Zappa deployment. However, if you want to run this within another region, you can always extend this configuration. So for example, now if you want to run this within a different region, you can specify that as maybe production _AP_east_1. Then you can have the AWS region, which is going to be this. Then finally, you can specify extends the production config. However, we are going to ignore that, so I would just remove this. I'm going to work only with the production config. So another thing to note is Zappa needs to have your environmental configuration listed here. However, obviously, we would want to avoid that. We don't want our Zappa information or our environmental information to be shown here. Remember, when we push this to our GitHub repo, all this information will be available. Yeah, we don't want to ignore this because that's what is going to use to deploy your project anyways. So I figured another way to handle this by creating a script to do that. So here I'm going to create a new file for that script within the root directory. So I'll call this script load_env.py. So I'll just copy and paste what the content is and go through it with us. All right, so here is the content of our script, and this is what it entails. So import JSON, that's available within Python by default. The coupled is installed already. You can confirm this if you come to requirements. We would see Django decouple. Let's see. Python decouple here. So here it is. So we use decouple to import content from our environment file. So yeah, we have this. So I define this function which takes all the content within our environment file by doing this. So here is the config. Then I open the Zappa configuration with this, load the JSON file, then located the production config, set the environmental variables, and put the environmental configurations there. So I can print the settings later on to verify what I have, but I will remove this. Then once that is done, I can close the file. And yeah, that's all this does. It's quite straightforward. So this is going to happen within runtime when we are pushing our content to AWS Lambda. And as a result of that, it's never going to be available within Zappa configuration itself. So that's about that. So we're almost done with our process. So the next stage now is to set up GitHub workflow for GitHub Action, because remember, we are going to handle this automatically with GitHub Action. So we need GitHub workflow for that. So also a prerequisite for this would be you setting up your AWS IAM access. Okay. So I have this set up already. And it's quite straightforward. All you have to do is come down to users, create a new user. I have control, and just give it a permission. So yeah, the permission this as is the administrator access, and you can always copy your key information from there. Yep, so here is my access key. It also requires your secret access as well. Yep. So once that's done, let's come back to our code to actually set up the GitHub workflow. So to do that, we are going to create a new folder, .github. And within that folder, we are going to create another folder called workflows. So here we are trying to deploy. We really don't care about the integration. So here we're just going to have cd.yml here. So workflows are defined with YAML file. All right, so I have the configuration for our CD predefined already, and I'm going to explain through why I did what I did and what they all do. So first thing first, I specified the name, which is continuous deployment. Then I defined my workflow condition. So we have several conditions. You can have on push. So whenever you push your repo, it's going to start the flow process. And we have the manual flow as well. So here is the manual flow, which involves me to specify an input. So here, whenever you want to run the continuous deployment, it's going to require you to specify what operation you want to perform. And I have two operations. I have updates and I have deploy. So unlike serverless.yaml, where it's able to track the state of your application. So if your application has been deployed already and you try to deploy again, it's just going to update it rather than redeploying. And if you've not deployed at all, it's going to deploy afresh. In the case of Zappa, it's not able to note that. So you have to be able to tell if you are updating or you are deploying from start. So if you don't have your project on Lambda already, that means you want to deploy. However, if you make any changes and you want to update, that means you are updating, as the name implies. So that's on that note. So this is how the operation happens. So after clicking on whatever operation you want to perform, the jobs is what actually gets performed. So this is going to kick off whenever you select your operation. And this whole process is running on Ubuntu latest. So we have to define our steps here. So the first step is to check out. So it's going to check out your code and pull it in this virtual environment where it can perform all its operation. And also, I'm also going to tell it to set the whole thing up with Python. Yeah, I'm using Python. And here I can specify the Python version I'm using. So remember, we've been running things with Python version 3.9. So again, we are going to use that here. So also, Python operates with virtual environment where you install all your packages. We are going to do the same thing here. So we set up virtual environment and we do this. So this is what Python comes in by default, or I think maybe most Ubuntu environments. So this is what they come in by default. However, my system, I decided to use virtual env. So yeah, that's about that. So now that you set up your virtual environment, so next we want to install dependencies. And for every operation you want to perform, you have to ensure that you activate the environment. So that's what we are doing here. We activated the environment and we installed the dependencies. So yeah, I think I was using a make configuration initially, but yeah, that won't be necessary. So instead of just saying make install, so the first thing was to upgrade pip. Then after upgrading pip, we can have pip install -r, then requirements.txt. So because we've checked out, everything will be available at this point, so we can access requirements.txt. So the next thing we want to do is to configure AWS credentials. So this is going to configure AWS credentials for that environment. So you can just run AWS, and because your credentials has been set up, it's going to know what to do. So remember when I was telling you to set up your IAM access on AWS? So setting up that, you would have access to the access key as well as the secret key. So we'll provide all those things here. So as you can see here, this is making a reference to the GitHub secrets. So I'm going to set that one later on. Let's not bother about that for now. But take note of the two keys. So finally, we set up the requirements. So again, we are performing an operation that requires Python. So we have to activate the environment. And now we can do load env. So we run this to update our Zappa settings with our environment. Then finally, based on the choice we've made, so if we are updating, this will be the name here. If we are deploying, this will be the name here. And also based on that choice, again, we activate our environment. Then we have Zappa deploy production or Zappa update production. Remember, production is the config name here. So this is what it's going to use to either deploy or update. So that's it about our workflow config. And we are done with that. So the next thing we want to do is to actually create a GitHub repo. So let's go back to our browser for that. So I'll pull out GitHub. And I'll create a new repository. So I'm the owner of the repo, and this is going to be Zappa blog project. Okay. Let me just quickly add a description. All right, so this is going to be public because I want everybody to be able to access it. So I'm going to make provisions for this later on. And yeah, that's all we are going to have for now. So once we've done that, we have access to this. So I'll just copy this for now. I'm going to use that later on. So coming back into my code, I can clear this out. This particular project is not a Git repository at the moment. So we can change that by having Git init. And now it is now a Git repository. And because we ignored the environment file earlier, we have it as ignored here. So what I copied from GitHub, I'll paste here. And what that does is to add the remote I just created. So git remote add origin, that particular project. So I'll do that, clear this. So also by default, this is going to be a master branch. I can change it to main. So git branch -m main. So yeah, rename failed because it has not even established that it's a master yet. So let's establish that by doing git add all. So we're adding everything. Git commit -n Zappa project setup. So with that done, now it's aware that this is a master branch. We can confirm by having git branch. So this is master. So we want to change it to main. So again, I'll put that command up. So git branch -m main. So now it's changed to main. We can confirm once again by doing git branch. Cool. So the final step now is to push to our origin. Now we can do that by having git push -u origin main. So I'm putting the -u so that I don't have to type in origin main every time again. So I have that. All right, so with that done, let's go back to our browser. Let's refresh this page. And now we have everything we need. So the workflow, we have the project itself, except for the environment, which is cool, which is what we want to have. And yeah, this configuration might not be necessary again because we've changed things a little bit. So thinking about it, I think we might probably have a feature where juice.io would be able to set up Zappa for you. And all you have to do is just deploy from there and you have your project. So that's just by the way. So now the next thing we want to do is to go to our settings. And we want to go to secrets and variables. And we want to go to actions. So remember, we need to set some variable here. So I'm going to go ahead and set this variable. So here I'm going to have new repository secrets. And let's confirm the name we defined within our workflow. So this is AWS access key ID. So that's what you want to copy. So you come back here and paste that here. So I've added my access key ID. Next, I'll do for the secret key ID. So let's do that. So as we can see, we've made update for both. Okay, so you need to also do that as well. So once we are done with both, if we come back to our actions, and because we define the workflow, we will have an action to perform. So continuous deployment, we can click on it. And it's not running by default because we have to perform an operation. So at the moment, we don't have the app deployed yet. So we want to perform a deploy operation. So let's do that. So the branch is main and the operation is deploy. So let's click run workflow. And this is going to start. Let's refresh just to confirm that. So as you can see, it has started. Let's pull it up to see what is going on. So it's deploying, it's starting job. All right, so it looks like we have an issue with AWS credentials, or rather our requirements. All right, so we have an issue, obviously, and that was because the env file does not exist by default, okay? So to make this work the way we want it, because obviously we still don't want to push the env, so what we want to do instead is, when we are running this whole operation, we can try to get the env content. Okay, we'll store it within this environment, make the Zappa configuration pull whatever it wants to pull, then we are done. We won't see it anyways. So also I have a script to handle that. So let's come back to our code. So the script in this case is actually a bash script. So let's create a new file for it. Get env.sh. So here is the content of our get env.sh script. So for this, we'll be making use of AWS Secret Manager. So AWS Secret Manager is another service that allows you to store your secret information and allow you get it whenever you need to get it, which is what we are doing in this case. So here, this is going to be the secret name. I have not defined it yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the secret name, then put every secret information I have within it. Okay? So this is just the simple command to get the secrets from AWS Secret Manager. So AWS Secret Manager gets a secret value. The secret ID is the secret name. The query is this and everything like that. So it's getting everything in a test. And this is me creating the env file. So, but this time around is creating it in a virtual environment where it's going to be temporarily used to load our env. Then I'm touching it, creating the file. Then I'm echoing what I have within the secrets, doing some formatting and putting it within that env file. Then finally, I have a prompt to tell me that, okay, I've done everything successfully. So that's all that is doing. So now we've done this, we can save everything. So git add all, git commit -m. However, before we even get to that, we've not gotten to the point where we are loading the scripts. So before we can load the script, we want to make sure that this particular script itself is executable first. So I can come down here. As part of my setup requirements, before we load the env, I want to run that script to get the env first. So I'll make the script executable by changing mod. So change mod plus X for executable. And that was going to be the current directory, which is get env.sh. Then after doing that, I want to actually run it. So that's just the procedure for that. So this is going to get the env and create a new file within our temporary environment. And now Python load env would be able to work. So let me re-add everything again. Git commit -m. Get or rather implement get env scripts. Okay. Then again, I can push. This time around, I don't have to specify -u and push origin u or anything. So I push and that should be updated. However, we've not created the blog project secrets yet on the AWS Secret Manager. So take note of that. And that's what we are going to do next. So let me go back to my code. And now the getenv.sh exists. We can verify that it has our content. So now we can come back here, go to service, look for secret manager. And yeah, I have this already. I want to store a new secret. It's going to be the other type of secrets. And here you can specify your key value. So let me do that now. All right, so here are the keys we want to set values for. Okay, I believe by now we would have access to all this information. So DB information for the DB and cloud API key, API secret for our file storage. So I'll go ahead and provide the value for this and save it. So once I'm done, I'll pull us back. So once I provide the value for this, I'm going to click on the next. I think that's all we have to do here. All right, so I've provided the configuration name, which we are good on that note. So the next thing we want to do is to provide the secret name. And again, just so we are sure, let's copy the name we specified here. I'll come back here and provide the name. You can provide the description if you want. I don't need to. And yeah, that's all I want to do. Store. So if I refresh once more, now I have my blog project secrets, which is what I want to have. So yeah, we are done on that note and we've updated our repo with this configuration. So let's see if it actually works. So we come back to the action, continuous deployment, and deploy. Okay, still seems we have an issue. Let's take a look. All right, it looks like I see our error. We are using root directory, even though we didn't define it. So let's fix that. So back within here, we have the definition for root directory here, which we didn't define. So it was trying to create the env file within the root directory of our GitHub, which we do not have permission to. So all we need to do now is just define the root directory, and it's quite straightforward. Here's the snippet for that. So git rev pass show top level. So it's just going to link us back to the current directory we are in. So yeah, that's all we have to do. Let's save again. So updates get env scripts, add root there. Yep, and push. So I think this is the final push we would have to make. Everything should work now. I'm quite optimistic. So let's take a look. Come back here, actions, continuous deployment, run workflow. So we are deploying. As you can see, setup requirements was successful this time around. That means it was able to load our env. All right, so our deployment is completed. And let's take a look at the URL we obtained. So here is our URL, production. So let's click on it. And voila, we have our content. So let's zoom in. Let's access blog paths. Yep, there we have it. So because we are within a serverless environment, it's not able to load our styles. So in situations like this, you might want to just, what do we call it? Forgotten the name. Load your style from a different environment. However, we won't bother too much about that. We are not meant to be testing here. We are meant to test within either Postman or our front end. And I think this is sufficient for that. So yeah, we have our stuff. We are able to quickly get a backend project in Django, set up Zappa and deploy. Testing and it's working. So we are good to go. So there you have it, guys. I believe this prerequisite would play a major role in our future projects. See you in our next episode. Bye for now.